Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. Can everybody hear me? Great. Well, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you all for having me today. Tomorrow is finally Election Day. You have no idea what that means for us. Just a few reminders for Election Day. Tomorrow, the polls will be opening at 6 a.m. That is for each federal election. On Tuesdays, we open them up at 6 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. And if the public is in line at 8 p.m., you will be allowed to vote. Voters should bring their photo ID, and before going, I would encourage everyone to check out the govote.com. That's GEAUX vote.com. Or the free Go Vote mobile app. There, voters can log in to our voter portal and find their polling place and sample ballot. And since I mentioned Go Vote, go Tigers, what an excellent game we had. I think we can celebrate Election Day by celebrating the Tigers winning. So everybody go out and vote. During early voting, 272,265 people voted in person, and 100,414 people have voted by absentee ballot. In total, 372,679 people have cast a ballot thus far in this election, which accounts for 12.3% of all eligible voters. Now, I'm no stranger to a little political smack talk now and then, as that's what we do. Those of us in office, we get smacked at, and so sometimes we have to smack back. But as public officials and elected officials, we accept this as part of the territory. What I cannot abide by is the suggestion that our elections are anything less than secure. Louisiana has had and will continue to have fair, accurate, and secure elections, no matter what anyone else claims. Our elections and our election practices are a model for the nation. Organizations like the Heritage Foundation ranks Louisiana 6th in the nation in election integrity, and the Electoral Integrity Project have given us high marks for our procedures and performances in past elections. The Louisiana Legislative Auditor just this year, I quote, "Overall, we found that the Louisiana Department of State has procedures and practices in place to ensure election integrity," end quote. These organizations praised, among other things, our vote counting practices, our anti-ballot harvesting measures, our voter ID requirement, and the accuracy of our voter rolls, when the legislative auditor found that our rolls are over 99% accurate. I'm happy to say that in Louisiana, we've worked in a bipartisan way with the legislature and the governor to pass important legislation such as bills to ban ballot harvesting, ensure we're getting the most accurate information from the Louisiana Department of Health as it relates to deceased voters, and to require that the next voting system in Louisiana will have an auditable paper trail. However, there is still work to do. Our state needs a supplemental voter canvass, as the legislative auditor suggested in their report, and we absolutely must ban the private funding of elections, a move endorsed by the Advocates Editorial Board earlier this year. Multiple bills to implement these important reforms have passed the legislature, but unfortunately were vetoed by the governor. I would hope that should similar bills pass in the next legislative session, that the governor would use his remaining time in the mansion to advance election integrity. In addition to the legislation we've championed, our office has implemented important security measures surrounding our election equipment. Despite what anyone says, our machines are never connected to the internet and never will be. Only my staff programs and tests our machines. Machine testing is a process that is open to the public. My staff and the Parish Board of Election Supervisors verify the counters and seals on the machines. The results are then transmitted to my office on a private, secure, protected, constantly monitored line. And that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out the year. We go to great lengths to ensure that our elections are accurate and secure, and anyone who makes audacious claims about our citizens' votes being sent to some foreign country or being flipped is just not telling the truth, and I challenge them to provide a shred of evidence. I am proud of the elections we run in Louisiana, and everywhere I go, I hear praise for the extraordinary work my staff does to deliver elections to the people of Louisiana, along with our partners, the clerks of court and their staff, and the registrar of voters and their staff. I would like to talk about now the future of elections. On the December 10th ballot, next month, voters will have a chance to support a constitutional amendment to the state constitution that would prohibit non-citizens from registering or voting in any election in our state. There exists a potential loophole in our state's constitution that gives me pause, especially when I see other states exploit similar loopholes in their elections to allow for non-citizen voting. Even the Washington Post editorial board recently expressed their opposition to a bill going through the D.C. Council to allow non-citizens to vote in their municipal voting. This is not just a hypothetical issue. Multiple localities have implemented proposed this policy around the country. I believe this flies in the face of what it means to be a citizen, and it cheapens the right to vote for the sake of a partisan advantage. Perhaps the biggest issue I'm asked about, however, is our next voting system. The Voting System Commission wrapped up their work this summer and made a broad set of recommendations to me. Although they recommended a scanned tabulation of ballots for how ballots are to be counted, they also recommended either hand-marked paper ballots, ballot marking devices, or a combination of the two. The next step in this process will be the promulgation of standards. Once we get past this election, we will begin that work, which will be followed by the crafting and release of the request for proposals. We are still some ways off from full implementation, but I'm happy to say that this next system will include a fully auditable paper trail, something that I have supported since before I became Secretary of State. Election and cybersecurity experts from across the political spectrum agree that systems with fully auditable paper trails are the most secure types of systems. They ensure that the intent of the voter is indeed reflected in the final results. It will ensure that we maintain the confidence of the voters of our great state. I look forward to your questions. Yes, ma'am.
Many voters, there are still a lot of people who don't believe that the elections were true, that the election was stolen in 2020. We've heard you say many times that our elections are safe, and that is the truth. But what can be done to really help ease those people who still believe in that idea?
Being more transparent about the processes that work. I can't speak to other states, but we've been very transparent. Most everything that we do is in a public meeting. We've talked about those things that we can in terms of security measures taken both in my office, working with the clerks and the registrars, et cetera. And I think the more dialogue we have and the more questions we answer, I think we can get to the bottom. We're not going to convince everybody, but we're certainly willing to convince those who are willing to understand what we do and how we do it going forward. Yes, ma'am.
As we continue to evolve in our elections and the different ways that we can vote, and mail-in ballots are becoming more popular, would you be in support of any legislation that may come in the future to expand those who are eligible to vote by mail in our state?
That's a public policy issue. I'm not really, at this time, I'm not in support of expanding mail-in balloting. I think we'd have to have a lot more security measures put in place to make sure there wasn't any fraudulent voting. I think what comes with increased mail-in balloting are the necessity for drop boxes and all that comes with that. And I certainly see that could be more manipulated than our current absentee ballot program. I think we are a high standard. I think the auditors have shown that with the way we do it now. But increasing paper, I think, increases the opportunity to create fraudulent opportunities.
And where are we at with the purchasing of a new voting system? Can you kind of give us a timeline for that?
Well, we have to get through this election, November and December, and then we'll be working to develop the standards. We'll be having public hearings on that, and then we have to go through oversight on that. Then we can begin the RFP, development of the RFP, and then publicize that, working with the Office of State Procurement, and then going through the process as the law prescribes.
Would you see that potentially going through before the next presidential election?
I think it'll probably be finalized between the gubernatorial and the presidential, but then you have to start the implementation process, and we probably would be on the borderline of that. And we want to do it, implementation, we want it to be very pragmatic. We want to be able to educate the public as to how are things going to work, what the newness of is it, plus we have to train not only our staff, but we also have to work with the clerks and the registrars and their staffs to get them up and running. So what we want to do is a phased-in approach, just like we did previously. Melinda, and then the gentleman in the back.
I just want to know what your prediction was for turnout tomorrow.
Yeah, based on early voting, we think we'll be somewhere between 42 and 46% turnout. Yes, sir.
I've heard that this is a long ballot. Why is it a long ballot?
Well, we have the U.S. Senate race. We have each of the congressional races. Then you have local elections. There's some special elections for judicial positions. Then you have municipal elections. Then you have municipal propositions, and then constitutional amendments. We have 5 constitutional amendments on there. Don't ask me what they are. Melinda can answer that. Yes, ma'am.
As we go down these long ballots, we see voter turnout reduce, especially when it gets to those constitutional amendments. And the legislature continues to pass these, but they are not very popular, with voter turnout. What would you kind of say to your legislative colleagues of better ways to get voters more engaged on that?
Well, I would say this because I get this all the time, that voters would like to see the constitutional amendments have more plain language for them to understand what they actually do. And I tell them, sorry, I don't have any input in that. That comes straight from the legislature, so to contact their legislators. But I think if we could find a way to make the language more understandable as to what it actually does, then I think you'd have more input. But I totally understand where you're coming from. When I was first assistant, I worked in some parishes in scanning ballots, and there was a tremendous amount of, just anecdotally, you see a lot of drop off. I mean, people just got tired. I think that's when we had 24 candidates for U.S. Senate at the time, and then also you had, like, I think it was 10 constitutional amendments, something to that effect, and they quit voting. I mean, I guess voters get fatigued. Yes, sir.
So there's been some evidence in other states about partisan differences between different ways of voting, mail-in versus early voting versus election. What have you seen in regards to that?
We see it pretty balanced. This last early voting session, we saw where the Republicans and the Democrat registration were actually almost 50-50. Probably a point or two difference, a small difference. But you still have to account for, you've got more registered Democrats than Republicans and then independents, although the Republican registration has risen and Democratic registration continues to fall. Yes, sir.
Given quite the increasing importance and I guess like people who are early voting, can you explain to me why in a parish like Individual, separated by the Mississippi River, sometimes during early voting, like the Sunshine Bridge situation, and with upcoming traffic that we know why is there not an early voting in-person location on the east side of the parish?
That is a local issue. They have to petition me for an additional site, but we are in conversations with them because we do believe that geographical issues, for like you described for Iberville Parish, we've addressed some of those in other parishes, but we have to work with the parish so they can come up with the funding for the additional office space for the registrar or for the site, for the additional technology that we need for that site. And the additional personnel and commissioners for that site, because they're responsible for most of that cost. Not all, but most. Hey, Bill. Yep.
On a national level, I know they're starting to have more interest in having like partisan poll watchers, and then supposedly the partisan poll watchers may lead to voter intimidation. Are we having any issues with poll watchers and having to do anything different with commissioners?
No, there was some legislation last year. We were going to work on a pilot program with regards to that. There were some concerns when a parish is heavier Republican or heavier Democrat, what can the parties do or what can poll watchers do? That did not pass. I think what you'll see is we've seen an increase, particularly from the clerks, we've seen an increase in the number of people willing to be polling commissioners, but unfortunately they're not ready for the service because they can't take off work all day for a Tuesday election or a Saturday. It's very interesting what the dynamics that we're seeing, but we're not seeing the partisanship in terms of at the polling locations that other states have on a regular basis. Yes, sir.
We've seen both parties this year get controversy, get into a bit of trouble trying to endorse candidates or endorsing candidates early in an open primary. Is this going to spark any reconsideration of the open primary system that we have now? And is there a perfect system to deal with those questions?
Well, I definitely don't believe there's a perfect system anywhere. But I will say this. We had a task force to discuss the open primary issue, moving from an open primary to closed primaries. They made recommendations to go forward with it. It would change a lot of the way we do things in terms of my office and the clerks and the registrars. It would require, in my opinion, a lot more polling commissioners because when you look at the models from other states, it requires a Republican and a Democrat to be present. That would create us, I believe, issues because I just don't think we have the amount of participation. We're constantly still trying to get more and more commissioners. We're looking at some shortages. When you look at the dynamics of a closed party primary, that means you've now added more elections into the process. And I think as I travel around, all I hear is, can we reduce the number of elections? So all those things need to be looked at. I do think the next administration is going to have to face that issue along with the Secretary of State, should that be me or whomever. Yes, sir.
Representative Willard had a resolution to study, maybe looking at how we're helping people with special needs and low groups. I know you've done some great work around that. Can you just give us an update on that task force and where it's at?
Sure. So we've had, I believe, 2 meetings of the commission. We've had a member of the Election Assistance Commission come down and speak to us about the best practices that they've learned about and what the federal law is about. We've also had, of course, we put forth. We put forth what we do currently in Louisiana. Can we do more? Yes. What we need to build it into is what the new system is going to be like and how we can work those new perceptions in. But we're working very closely with the disability community. I think our final meeting will be in January, and we're still waiting to see who our guest speakers will be in terms of that. But we're very cognizant of the needs of the disability community. We passed some years back the ability to securely electronically send them their ballots. The challenge for them is, do they have the technology at home to be able to mark that ballot without assistance? But certainly they can have the assistance that they want rather than the assistance that is needed at the polling locations, or they can bring their own person. So anybody who's in the disability community that hasn't signed up for the disability program to make sure that they have assistance that they choose at the polling locations that they go to, then we want them to sign up for that and to utilize that. Yes, sir, right behind.
With tens of thousands of mail-out ballots at each election, they're supposed to be in before the day of election tomorrow. Is it possible that someone sees that ballot signed, sealed, sitting on the table tomorrow? Is there still a procedure where they can vote tomorrow?
They can go in person and vote.
Do they bring up
No, sir. They do not. They need to destroy that envelope and just vote in person. And the deadline is 4:30 p.m. today for the ballots to be in. And I think that's one of the things that keeps us in the highest ranking for election integrity, because we're not still looking for ballots. The only ones that can come in after 4:30 p.m. today are military ballots, overseas individuals, and hospitalized voters. They can fax their ballot in. But they have to sign a waiver of their secrecy to ballot, because somebody's got to take that off the fax and put it in an envelope and present that to the parish board for counting. Yes, ma'am.
Are you seeing an increase in independents, voters switching parties?
Yes, ma'am. Independent voters are growing at a much larger rate right now than Republicans at this moment in time. It was Republicans growing faster than either Democrat or Independent, but now it's Independent more than Republican or Democrat. And we're not talking about huge amounts. We're just, incrementally. Ms. Beth?
When you look at the video and hear the pressure put on the Georgia Secretary of State, what does that do for you? Does it make you nervous?
I'm nervous all the time. There is no safety net for a Secretary of State who's in charge of elections. We either have a good election or we don't. And we have to have a process that's more accurate than any other. We have a higher level of accomplishment needed than any other agency in state government, because if we get it wrong, it's wrong. Everybody sees it. But we are obviously very diligent with our clerks and our registrars. We have not had the amount of, I would say, acrimony in this state as Georgia has had, but we've had a fair amount, and we get our election officials, both my staff and I, and the clerks and the registrars have probably received the most pressure that they've ever received. A lot of accusations, a lot of negativity towards them and how they do their job, or the accusations of our equipment or what have you. The problem is people see something in another state and they immediately translate it to Louisiana without really doing the research for Louisiana and how we do things differently in Louisiana. Every parish is working at the same time, literally almost at the same time, doing the same things. We're a top-down state. All of our processes and procedures are outlined, and everybody's following them at the same time. They don't realize that there's a local board that is the one actually counting the votes. These are people in their community, in their political party or not, their local elected official, their local appointed official. It's a very intricate process. And, of years ago, and I know, Beth, you'll remember this, and some of my other friends in the room, Charlie Lancaster and Pepe Bruno worked really hard on the House and Governmental Affairs Committee. And over years, they built an election code that is, I think, non-challenged by any other state. I think it's absolutely one of the top in the nation. And we've only continued to improve it and improve the transparency and improve the processes. And I think Louisiana is unique in this moment in time as to where we are with election integrity, how we do our elections. The next step is just having that auditable trail so that we can have independent audits to make sure the equipment is producing the results that we expect.
Speaking of the acrimony, are you worried about having people protecting workers at the poll place?
No, I think Louisiana is really a unique place. I don't believe that we will have any of that in Louisiana in terms of disruptions at the polling locations. But we have trained, our clerks have done a fine job training the commissioners in charge as to what their procedures are should there be a disruption in the polling location. And I want to rest assured, the first call is not to the federal government. The first call is to the clerk by that commissioner in charge, and if it's a an imminent danger, then that commissioner is absolutely empowered to call local law enforcement right away. So local law enforcement is the first step in settling any issues inside of a polling location. And it's a felony for anybody to disrupt the voting process, so they will be dealt with. But certainly I hope that Louisianians understand, I think they have confidence in overall in our elections and our policies and processes and procedures, and I think they will act just like they did in the presidential. And we've had 6 elections up to this point since the presidential, and we've had none of these problems. Yes, sir.
Now, after all these years, and having shown your ability to work on both sides of the aisle, showing your confidence, after the close of what will hopefully be another peaceful, quiet, unquestionable, valid election, will there be an announcement that you'll be running for governor?
I have an announcement for you right now. I will not be running for governor. Yes, ma'am.
In states across the country, there are people who are running campaigns for Secretary of State who believe that American elections are fraudulent. What's kind of your response to seeing that becoming a new trend?
My response is I believe in Louisiana's elections. I believe in Louisiana's people, and I think we're doing the right things. And if other states want to look at how we do things, I'd be glad to show them.
But some people, including Rudy Giuliani, say the Dominion group rigged the election. We've done business with Dominion. What's been the experience of Louisiana?
Louisiana's experience with them has been good. We've had no problems that we've seen. We have no indications of any nefarious activity. I think the difference is that in other states, it's a county level process, and so the counties don't actually have the money to run their elections the way we do in Louisiana. Our employees are much more involved in the machinery and the programming and the implementation or the actual vote counting than is done in other states. So we don't rely on our vendors as much as other states do.
You couldn't hear the question.
His question was, did we have any issues? Well, Rudy, why don't you repeat your question for me?
Well, Rudy Giuliani has stated that Dominion voting systems rigged the 2020 election. That's the same company Louisiana uses. Why are we different than other states? Or is Giuliani just off base about everything?
No comment.
You know, there's been talk in some states that it may take like days to count all votes. Do you anticipate getting all our votes counted by the end of the, like by midnight tomorrow night? Or?
Yes. So the question is, if you couldn't hear, in essence, do we see us being having all our votes unofficially counted by midnight? Unlike other states, we'll have to have days of counting. Yes. So the presidential, the only reason why our last reporting and from Calcasieu Parish came in after midnight is because they started later in the day, and of course, you know, after Laura and Delta, you know, they could be forgiven for that. But I mean, we've had Laura, Delta, Zeta, storms in between, Ida, and we still get our election returns in a timely manner, and that's our gold standard. And I have to give credit to the clerks and the registrars and the parish board members. Our staff help supplement them, but they do a great job. And I think it was important during COVID when we had emergency provisions and us allowing larger parishes, or now parishes with 100,000 or more, allowing them to start processing but not counting votes up to 3 days before the election helps that time frame for us.
What is the difference between processing?
Oh, processing is simply, one, we have a checklist of all voters that were sent a ballot. We have a checklist of all voters who returned their ballots. And so we have to match a ballot with the list. And then we open the outer envelope. and then they check to make sure that the flap has all the certifying information along with the signature and a witness. If not, then that goes to the parish board for challenge on vote counting day. Otherwise, it's left, then we tear off the flap, and then we leave the ballot in that. So the anonymity is there for the counting purposes, but we've made certain that it's an appropriate, legitimate ballot to be counted. Bill?
When I was legal counsel for the registrars, the election officials would always say, we don't care who wins as long as they win big. Because our law specifically says the only way you can really challenge an election is if you can show that you can alter the outcome of the election. Well, now you have so many people who are not even believing the numbers. And so, have you worked with anybody in the legal community to talk about the 1401, the legal challenge components after election night?
Yeah, we look at it, and until we implement a new system, we're not going to be able to get there. We've got to have the paper trail because that's what's auditable. Otherwise, the only thing we're recounting is recounting the, as you well know, the paper ballots, the absentee mail-in ballots. So until we get to that paper verification process, we won't be able to change that.
It's just unfortunate because it's worked for so many years prior to now, and all of a sudden people are starting to tarnish the electoral process by debating the numbers. Our numbers have always been good.
They have. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Just real quick, the 42 to 46% turnout that you were anticipating roughly, would that be high, low, about average for turnout?
I think it's a little bit higher. No, you're telling average. Sorry, average. Anyone else?
Why do you think most people will not be voting?
Work, probably work conditions, although we open up early before most people go to work, and then we close well later than people get off work, most people. I think that they may be frustrated with the political circumstances that are going on around the country. They may be, I think they're fatigued. I think there's not been a reduction. I'll tell you this. I had no phone calls, relatively speaking, since 2022. No, when we had the November election of 2021. It was quiet through the spring of 2022, and we've ramped up again because of the federal election. So the state elections didn't bring the animosity or the partisanship or the polarization or whatever you want to call it until it becomes a federal election. So I think it's driven by the direction of the country and the amount of talk. Right now, every state except Louisiana, Mississippi, and Kentucky have not only a U.S. Senate race and their congressional members, they also have governor and legislature and all that. Louisiana is in an off cycle from all of that. And so it's a very different process for us than it is for other states. Lanny?
Early voting is a convenience. A lot of people do it now just by routine. Is there a thought that might be expanded at some point, just because people are getting more used to it?
So the question is, would we expand early voting because it's a convenience? I'm not in favor of expanding early voting at this point in time. I think we have plenty of time. My concern with expanding are twofold. One, a labor problem, a financial problem, and then also I think more voter fatigue. So when we have commissioners, they have to work the whole day, so 8:30 to 6 p.m. every single day. We like to stay as consistent as possible, having the same workers because they understand the process. Otherwise, you just keep training and training and training. And I think elections are long enough in Louisiana. I mean, we are a very political state, and it's it's very difficult. The mechanics of administering an election are much more difficult than people realize. And again, it's not just turn on, turn off. It's all the prep leading up to, and those 7 days between the end of early voting and election day are very critical for us for setup for election day.
How much of a drop-off will there be between now and the next election, December?
We haven't predicted the drop-off, but there's usually a decent amount of drop-off. And if there is no U.S. Senate race or congressional races on the ballot, and if it's just municipal and most of those are determined and it's just constitutional amendments, then it's going to be pretty low, unfortunately. Are you telling me it's time? All right, thank y'all. Go vote.
All right, come back next Monday, same time, same place.